I managed my father's rental properties for 9 years for free. The week he remarried, his new wife changed every lock. My name is Sloane Mercer, and I was 34. The Tuesday morning I drove to the first property on my route and my key did not work. I stood on the front step of a duplex on Harlow Street that I had managed for 9 years, and I put my key in the lock and the key did not turn. I tried it twice. The way you try things twice when the first attempt produces a result, your brain refuses to accept. It did not turn the second time either. I stood on that step for a moment. Then I drove to the second property, Clement Avenue, a 4-unit building I had filled twice from vacancy, screened 47 tenants for, and repainted the exterior of with a color I had chosen myself from a sample board I had driven 40 minutes to pick up because my father said he trusted my eye. My key did not work there either. I sat in my car outside the Clement Avenue building and I called my father. He did not answer. I called again. He did not answer. I sat in the car and I thought about 9 years, 108 months, 16 properties, a portfolio currently valued at approximately $2.1 million that I had managed, maintained, and grown from 11 units to 23 without a salary, without a management fee, without a single month off. All of it changed in 1 week while my father was on his honeymoon. I did not cry in the car. I did something more useful. I called my attorney. Welcome back to 2 a.m. Revenge F, where the quiet ones who kept every receipt finally get the room they deserved. If you have ever given 9 years of your life to someone who handed it to a stranger in 1 week, this story is for you. Drop a comment below and subscribe so the next one finds you. My father's name is Gerald Mercer, and he built his rental portfolio the way careful men build things, slowly, 1 property at a time, over 30 years of modest profits, reinvested and patient, waiting for the right opportunity. He started with a single duplex on Harlow Street when I was 5 years old. By the time I was in high school, he had 6 properties. By the time I graduated college, he had 11. He managed them himself for most of those years. The tenant calls, the maintenance coordination, the lease renewals, the inspections, with the specific dedication of a man who understood that a rental property is not a passive investment, but a living obligation that requires consistent attention, or it deteriorates in ways that cost more than the attention would have. He was good at it. He was also, by the time I was 25, slowing down in ways that the properties could not afford. His knees had been bad since his 50s. The maintenance calls that used to be a Tuesday errand had become a logistical problem he was solving less efficiently. He was missing things, not large things, small things, a lease renewal that went out 2 weeks late, an inspection that got rescheduled twice and then forgotten, a tenant complaint that sat in his voicemail for 4 days because he had not checked it, small things that accumulate. I was 25. And I had just finished my property management certification, and I had a job offer from a commercial firm downtown that would have paid me well and given me a career trajectory I had planned carefully. My father sat at the kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon and said he needed help. He did not ask. He said he needed help, and he looked at me with the expression of a proud man who had run out of alternatives, and I understood that the expression was as close to asking as he was going to get. I said I would help. I deferred the job offer. I told myself it was temporary. Temporary became 9 years, not through deception, not through a bait and switch where he promised payment and withheld it, through the specific gravity of usefulness. I was good at the work, better than he had been in the end, which I say not to diminish him, but because it is true and because it matters for what followed. I had systems. I built a management software structure that tracked every lease expiration, every maintenance request, every rent payment, every inspection date. I had vendor relationships, plumbers, electricians, painters, roofers, that I had cultivated over years, and that gave the portfolio preferential pricing because of the volume and reliability I brought. I screened tenants with a rigor that dropped the vacancy rate from 11% to 3% over 4 years. I expanded the portfolio from 11 properties to 16 in the first 4 years, and then to 23 by year 8 through a combination of identifying undervalued properties in specific neighborhoods and convincing my father to buy them before anyone else understood what those neighborhoods were becoming. The portfolio grew from a value of approximately $800,000 when I started to $2.1 million at the time of the lock change. I did all of this without a salary. My father paid the property expenses, maintenance, insurance, property tax, and kept the net rental income. I kept nothing except the work. I want to be precise about why. Not because I was naive, not because I did not understand what management fees were. I had quoted them to clients at the commercial firm in my interview. I knew exactly what professional management cost. I did it because my father asked me to, and because I believed it would be reflected somewhere eventually, in the estate, in a formal arrangement we would get around to formalizing, in the specific, unspoken understanding between a father and a daughter that labor given freely is labor that will be honored. I believed that. For 9 years I believed it. My mother had died when I was 22, 3 years before I took over the portfolio. She had been the emotional center of the family, the person who made my father's particular brand of stoic competence livable, who softened the edges, who said the things he could not bring himself to say. After she died, the house was quieter than I had known a house could be. My father managed his grief the way he managed everything, by working. He was at the properties every day for the first year, not because they needed him every day, because being needed was the only scaffolding he had left. I understood that. I moved back into the house for a year after she died, not because he asked, because the alternative was him alone in a house that had gone too quiet, and I could not do that to him. I cooked on Sundays. I answered the tenant calls when he was tired. I learned the properties the way I learned everything, from the inside out, in detail, until I understood them better than the person who had built them. When I moved back to my own apartment a year later, the transition was seamless because I had already become indispensable. I had taught myself to be. That is the thing about becoming indispensable to someone who is grieving. You do it from love, and love does not come with an exit strategy. Sandra arrived in year 7. My father met her at a neighborhood association meeting. She had recently bought a small condo 2 blocks from his house, and she attended the meetings with the specific enthusiasm of a woman who had decided that community involvement was going to be the foundation of her new chapter. She was 56 to his 68, divorced once, 2 adult children who lived in other states. She was warm in the practiced way of a woman who had learned that warmth was the most efficient social tool and who deployed it with enough precision that it took me longer than it should have to understand that the warmth had a direction. It pointed toward my father, specifically toward my father's portfolio. I want to be careful here because I cannot see inside Sandra's mind, and I am not going to pretend I can. What I can tell you is what I observed. She asked about the properties on the 3rd dinner, not casually, specifically. How many units, what neighborhoods, what the vacancy rate ran. My father answered with the pride of a man discussing something he had built, and I watched Sandra listen with the attentiveness of a woman filing information. She asked about management on the 4th dinner, who handled the day-to-day. My father said his daughter and looked at me with a warmth I recognized as genuine. Sandra looked at me with a warmth I recognized as something else. Assessment. The specific look of a woman calculating the variables she is going to need to address. I filed it away. I kept managing the properties. I kept the records. They announced the engagement at a family dinner in October. My father stood up from the table with a glass of wine and a smile I had not seen on his face since before my mother died, and said he had something to tell us. He looked happy, genuinely, specifically happy in the way of a man who had been lonely for 7 years and had found a reason not to be. I stood up and I hugged him. I meant it. Whatever I felt about Sandra's property questions and her assessment looks and the specific direction of her warmth, my father's happiness was real, and it was mine to protect, not undermine. I hugged him and I told him I was glad. Sandra hugged me next. She was warm. She said she hoped we would be close. I said I hoped so too. I watched her eyes over his shoulder while she hugged him. They were already somewhere else. The wedding was set for March. In January, Sandra asked to meet with me about the properties, not with my father present, with me, alone. We met at a coffee shop downtown on a Wednesday morning, and she came with a notebook and a set of printed documents that she placed on the table between us with the specific efficiency of a woman who had prepared for this conversation in advance. She said she wanted to talk about the management structure going forward. She said she had been doing some research and she felt the portfolio could benefit from a more formalized approach. She said she had a contact at a property management company, a professional firm, that she thought would bring a level of expertise that would help the portfolio reach its potential. I looked at the printed documents. They were brochures for a property management company. I said my father and I had not discussed any changes to the management structure. She said she and Gerald had discussed it. She said it as Gerald, the way people say a name when they want you to understand that their access to that person is more current than yours. I said I would need to speak with him directly. She said, of course. She smiled. She gathered her brochures. She said she just wanted me to know in advance so it would not come as a surprise. She said it the way people say things they intend to be a surprise, regardless. I thanked her for the coffee. I drove home. I called my father. He answered on the second ring. He said Sandra had mentioned she was going to talk to me. He said she had some ideas about the portfolio. I said I heard. He said she meant well. I said I know. I said, Dad, are you planning to change the management structure? He was quiet for a moment. He said Sandra thought it might be time to professionalize things. I said I have been managing the portfolio professionally for 9 years. He said, I know you have. He said Sandra just thought a fresh set of eyes. He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. I said, I understand. I said, let's talk about it when you're back from the honeymoon. He said, yes, let's do that. He said everything would be fine. I hung up and I sat at my desk, and I thought about 9 years and 16 properties and a vacancy rate I had dropped from 11% to 3%, and a portfolio I had grown from $800,000 to $2.1 million. Then I called my attorney. Her name is Priya Mehta, and she handles property and contract law, and she had done some work for me on a lease dispute 2 years earlier, and she answered my call on a Thursday morning with the directness of a woman who had no patience for preamble. I told her the situation. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, what documentation do you have? I said everything. 9 years of management records, every lease I had drafted, every vendor contract I had negotiated, every maintenance record, every inspection report, every tenant communication, every rent collection record, every expense authorization my father had signed. She said, had I ever signed a formal management agreement with my father? I said no. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, had he ever put anything in writing about compensation or equity or any future arrangement? I said no. She said emails, texts, anything. I said there were texts, years of texts about the properties. My father directing me to handle things, my father acknowledging my work, my father's own words describing what I did. She said, send me everything. I said I would. She said, Sloane. I said yes. She said, do not change anything about how you operate until you hear from me. She said, keep managing the properties exactly as you have been. She said, keep every record from this point forward with particular attention to anything that demonstrates your ongoing operational role. She said, if anyone attempts to change the locks or remove your access, document it immediately with photographs and timestamps. She said she would be back to me within the week. I sent her 9 years of documentation in 4 folders. She called me back in 3 days. She said, this is more than I expected. She said the text record alone establishes a clear pattern of authorized management. She said she wanted to discuss something called a quantum meruit claim, compensation for the reasonable value of services rendered, and she wanted to discuss whether the circumstances supported an implied contract argument. She said the numbers were significant. I said, what numbers? She said 9 years of professional property management on a portfolio of this size and complexity. She said the market rate for what I had provided over 9 years was not difficult to calculate. She said she had calculated it. She said the number was $340,000 in management fees at the standard rate for my market. I said $340,000. She said conservative estimate. She said she was ready to send a letter when I gave the word. I said not yet. I said, let me try the direct conversation first. She said understood. She said the word when you're ready. I said I would. If you have ever been told everything would be fine by the person who was about to make everything the opposite of fine, stay with me. Subscribe so this story reaches you all the way to the end, because what happened the Tuesday morning I found the changed locks is the reason I know exactly what to do when someone mistakes patience for permission. My father and Sandra married on a Saturday in March. Small ceremony, 20 people. I was there. I gave a toast that was honest. I talked about my father's happiness and my mother's memory and the specific kind of love that finds you when you have stopped looking for it and means it the second time. People cried. Sandra squeezed my hand after. She said that was beautiful. I said I meant every word. I did. They left for their honeymoon on Sunday morning. 2 weeks in Portugal. My father hugged me at the airport and said he would call when they landed. He called when they landed. Everything was fine. I managed the properties the first week exactly as I had managed them for 9 years. Tenant calls, maintenance coordination, a lease renewal on the Clement Avenue unit that I drafted and sent and got back signed within 4 days because I had a system and the system worked. I filed everything. I kept every record. On Tuesday morning of the second week, I drove to Harlow Street. My key did not work. I documented the lock change before I did anything else. Photographs of the new lock hardware on each property. Timestamp on every photograph. I drove to all 16 properties that morning. Every single one had been rekeyed. Every single one. In the space of 1 week while my father was in Portugal, someone had hired a locksmith and changed 16 sets of locks on 16 properties that I had managed for 9 years. The work order, I would learn later, had been placed by Sandra's son, her son who lived in another state, who had flown in for the wedding and apparently stayed, who had no relationship to these properties beyond his mother's week-old marriage to their owner. I documented everything. Then I called Priya. I said, send the letter. She said, I'll have it out today. The letter went to my father's attorney, a man named Howard Bassett, who had handled my father's property transactions for 20 years, and who received Priya's correspondence on a Wednesday morning and called my father in Portugal before noon. I know this because my father called me at 12:47. His voice was not angry, it was tired. The specific tiredness of a man who had left for his honeymoon believing everything was settled and has returned from a phone call understanding it is not. He said, Sloane. I said, Dad. He said, Sandra said she was just getting things organized. I said she changed 16 locks. He said she said it was a security measure. I said a security measure that locked out the person who has managed these properties for 9 years. He was quiet. I said, I need you to understand what I am asking you here. I said, I am not asking you to choose between me and Sandra. I said, I am asking you to acknowledge 9 years of work and to have a conversation about what that work was worth before anyone makes any further decisions about how these properties are managed. He said, that's fair. He said, we will talk when I get home. I said, I need the locks restored before then. He said, I'll handle it. He said the locks would be restored by Friday. They were restored by Thursday. Sandra's son flew back to his other state on Friday. No one explained his departure to me. I did not ask for an explanation. I was waiting for the meeting. The meeting happened on a Monday evening, 2 days after my father and Sandra returned from Portugal. My father had asked me to come to the house. Sandra would be there. He said he wanted to handle it as a family. I said that was fine. I brought Priya, not to be adversarial, because I had learned from 9 years of property management that conversations about significant money are better had with a professional present, and because the number Priya had calculated deserved a professional voice. Sandra looked at Priya the way she had looked at me at the coffee shop. Assessment, then recalibration. She had not expected a property attorney. My father looked at Priya with an expression I could not entirely read. Something between relief and resignation, the look of a man who had understood that this conversation was going to require more than goodwill. We sat at the kitchen table where I had cooked Sunday dinners for a year after my mother died. Priya opened her folder. She did not make a speech. Priya never made speeches. She placed documents on the table the way all the best professionals in this story placed documents, cleanly, without drama, letting the paper do the work it was built to do. The first was a summary of 9 years of management activity. Properties managed, units occupied, vacancy rate, revenue generated, portfolio value growth, numbers, clean and specific and sourced from records my father himself had authorized and received over 9 years. The second was a market rate analysis, what professional property management cost in our market, what percentage managers charged, what the portfolio would have paid a professional firm over the same period. $340,000. Conservative. The third was a selection of text messages, my father's own words. Sloane, can you handle the Harlow Street inspection? Sloane, the Clement Avenue tenant is asking about the lease renewal. Can you draft it? Sloane, I don't know what I would do without you managing all of this. That last one he had sent in year 4 on a Sunday evening after a particularly complicated maintenance situation I had resolved in a day. I don't know what I would do without you. His own words, on the table, in front of his new wife and his daughter and a property attorney who had calculated exactly what those words had cost me. My father read the text messages. He read the one from year 4 twice. He set the papers down. He did not look at Sandra. He looked at me. He said I should have formalized this years ago. I said yes. He said I kept thinking we would get around to it. I said I know. He said I did not understand what it was costing you. I said I know that too. Sandra started to say something about the future and fresh starts and how she and Gerald had plans for the portfolio that would benefit everyone. Priya said that was wonderful to hear and that she looked forward to discussing those plans after the prior compensation question was resolved. Sandra said, what prior compensation question? Priya said the 9 years of professional management services rendered without payment. She placed the quantum meruit letter on the table. She said my client had provided professional property management services with a calculated market value of $340,000. She said she was not suggesting litigation. She said she was suggesting a negotiated resolution that acknowledged the value of those services in a form that was fair to both parties. She said the options were open for discussion. She said she simply wanted everyone at the table to understand that the option of doing nothing was not among them. Sandra looked at the letter. She looked at my father. She said, Gerald. My father said, Sandra, let me handle this. She looked at him. He looked at the text from year 4. "I don't know what I would do without you." He said, "Sloane, what do you want?" "I want to tell you what I asked for because I think it matters. Not because it was brilliant, because it was honest. I did not ask for $340,000. I knew my father did not have $340,000 liquid. I knew the portfolio was his retirement, and that liquidating any part of it was not what he needed at 68. I asked for 2 things. The first was a formal management agreement going forward, a real one. Industry standard fee, 8% of gross rental income, monthly, from the portfolio I had built. The second was a deed transfer on the Harlow Street duplex, the first property, the one he had bought when I was 5 years old, the one where my key had stopped working on a Tuesday morning. I said I want the original property. I said not as payment for 9 years, as acknowledgement. I said I want the place that started all of this in my name. My father looked at me for a long time. Then he looked at Sandra. She said it was a significant asset. He said yes, it was. He said it was also his daughter's. He looked at Priya. He said draw up the deed transfer and the management agreement. He said both. He said he wanted them signed before the end of the month. Sandra said Gerald. He said Sandra. He said my daughter managed everything I built for 9 years without asking for $1. He said the least I can do is give her the property that started it and pay her what she's worth going forward. He said, that is not a negotiation. He said it is what is right. Sandra was quiet, the specific quiet of a woman who has understood that the variable she needed to address has turned out to be more significant than she calculated. Priya wrote notes. My father looked at me. He said, "I'm sorry it took this long." I said, "I know, Dad." He said, "Your mother would have made sure this was handled years ago." I said, "Probably." He said she was better at the important conversations than I am. I said she was better at a lot of things. He almost smiled. He said yes, she was. The deed transferred on the 28th of the month. The Harlow Street duplex, my name on the title, clean and recorded and permanent. The management agreement was signed the same day. 8% of gross rental income, monthly, starting the 1st of the following month. I drove to Harlow Street the evening after the signing. I parked in front of the duplex where my key had not worked 3 weeks earlier. I sat in the car and looked at it, a duplex on Harlow Street that my father had bought when I was 5 years old. The first property, the beginning of everything, mine now. I got out of the car. I walked to the front door. I put my key in the lock. It turned. Sandra and I are not close. I want to be honest about that because the story does not have a tidy reconciliation, and I think pretending it does would be a disservice to the people who have been in this room and know that some dynamics do not repair. We are civil. We are professional. We are both present at the Sunday dinners that my father has reinstated. He started them 6 months after the meeting. Quietly, simply calling on a Thursday to say dinner Sunday if you want to come. I come every Sunday. Sandra is there. We talk about the properties in the specific, business-like way of 2 people who have a professional relationship they are managing carefully. She has not suggested external management firms again. I manage the portfolio. The portfolio is managed well. My father looks happy. I have made my peace with the specific kind of happy it is, the happiness of a man who loves his daughter and loves his wife, and has decided that the table is big enough for both and will not examine the corners where they do not fit. He is 68 years old and he is happy. That is worth the corners. I want to tell you about the key. I keep it on its own ring now. Separate from my other keys? The key to the Harlow Street duplex. The original key, the one that had been cut for the lock that was there before Sandra's son hired a locksmith and rekeyed everything while my father was eating dinner in Portugal. When the locks were restored, my father gave me the new key, but I had kept the old one. Not because it still opens anything, because it is the key to the property that started everything, and because it was in my possession before anyone decided it should not be, and because some things you keep as proof not of what you lost, but of what was always yours. It is on my desk now. I look at it on Tuesday mornings before I start the management calls. It does not open anything. It reminds me of everything. That is my story. 9 years, 108 months, 16 properties. And a Tuesday morning, when my key did not work, that turned out to be the most productive Tuesday of my professional life. If you have been managing something that belongs to someone else for years without a document to show for it, get the document, not because the people you love are untrustworthy, because the people they marry might be. Get the management agreement, get the acknowledgement in writing, get the key copied and keep the copy somewhere only you know about. Because a lock can be changed in a week, but a deed recorded at the county takes rather longer to undo. Share this with someone who needs to hear it tonight. Drop a comment and tell me which part of this story stayed with you. Hit subscribe and I will see you in the next one.